The church smelled of lilies and candle wax. Dozens of bouquets surrounded the coffin, their colors bright but lifeless, trying and failing to cover the truth of what this day meant. My wife, my partner of 40 years, was gone. I sat in the front pew, hands clasped tight, staring straight ahead. The priest's voice echoed softly against the high stone walls, but his words slipped past me like water. All I could feel was the hollow in my chest, the crushing weight of silence beside me where my wife should have been. For 4 decades, she was my anchor. Every morning, her voice was the first sound in our home. Every evening, she steadied me when life's storms tried to wear me down. And now that voice had gone silent forever. The organ groaned. People dabbed their eyes. Tissues crumpled in hands. I sat there, stiff and cold, the grief so raw it felt almost physical, like broken ribs. I thought nothing could wound me more than losing her. And then I heard it. Behind me, my daughter leaned toward her cousin. Her veil brushed the pew, her voice barely more than breath. But I caught every word. Now he's all alone, easy to control. The sentence cut sharper than any blade. I didn't move. I didn't turn my head. But my blood froze. At first, I wanted to believe I'd misheard. No daughter could say such a thing. Not here, not now, standing over the coffin of her own mother. But the faint curve at the corner of her lips, the glint of calculation in her eyes when I caught a glimpse, those killed any doubt. She thought I hadn't heard. She thought her whisper had dissolved into the hum of the organ, lost among the sighs of mourning guests. But I heard every word. And in that instant, my grief hardened into something else. The woman I loved had been lowered into the ground that morning. I thought I had nothing left. But my daughter's words poured iron into the emptiness. My pain sharpened, reshaped into resolve. Around us, the ceremony went on. The priest spoke of love, loss, eternity. Friends and relatives shared trembling memories, voices cracking as they remembered the woman who had touched their lives. Some cried openly, some bowed their heads in silence. Every eye saw me as the broken husband, the widower leaning quietly on his daughter for strength. And she played her role perfectly. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her arm looped through mine, a portrait of dutiful support. To them, she was a grieving daughter standing firm for her father. Only I knew the truth, that her hand on mine was not comfort, but a chain she already believed she had fastened. Easy to control. I let my breathing stay even, my face blank, as though consumed by sorrow. I gave her nothing, not a flicker of reaction, not a single sign that I had heard. But I had. I thought of my wife, how often she had defended her. "She's young," she would say when I pointed out her selfishness. "She doesn't mean it," she would insist when I caught her lying. I let it go then, for my wife's sake. I stayed silent. But silence is not blindness. And now, with her mother gone, my daughter had shed the mask completely. She revealed herself in 7 words, spoken with the smugness of someone who believed the game already won. The hymn ended. Guests shifted, stood, wiped their eyes. My daughter's hand squeezed mine gently, her lips trembling with an act of grief so convincing most would believe it. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her secret was safe. But secrets spoken aloud cannot be undone. They live in the air, in memory, in truth. When the final prayer was spoken, I rose slowly, as though the weight of age pressed me down. My daughter rose with me, slipping her arm tighter through mine, presenting herself as my only support. Poor man, they must have thought. Left with only his daughter now, I let them believe it. But under my jacket, against my ribs, rested the proof she had not counted on. Something stronger than her whispers, something sharper than her smile. That day I buried my wife. But in one careless moment, my daughter buried herself. And while I showed no reaction, I was already planning the moment she would learn what control really meant. She thought the game had just begun, but I was already 10 moves ahead. It didn't begin at the funeral. No betrayal ever does. Looking back, the cracks had been forming for years, only I had refused to see them. Or maybe I had seen, but love, my wife's love for our daughter, had blinded me, made me swallow the unease and call it nothing. The first memory that comes back to me is small, almost harmless. She was 16, her friends over for the night. I walked past her room and heard her laughing, bragging about how she had tricked me into giving her money for a school trip that never existed. I had paused, my hand on the doorframe, heart heavy with disappointment. But I said nothing. When I mentioned it to my wife later, she shook her head. "She's just a kid, Richard," she said softly. "Kids exaggerate. Don't take it so seriously." So I didn't. I let it go. But it didn't stop there. At 20, she borrowed her mother's jewelry for a party and swore she'd bring it back. She didn't. A week later, I found the necklace pawned downtown. My wife confronted her, but within an hour, our daughter was crying, promising she had been desperate, that it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. My wife forgave her. I stayed silent. The pattern repeated again and again. Lies smoothed over with tears. Manipulations dismissed as youthful mistakes. And through it all, my wife pleaded with me to be patient. She just needs time. She'll learn responsibility. But responsibility never came. Instead, entitlement grew. I began noticing how she looked at me, how she spoke to me. There was no warmth, no respect, just calculation. She treated her mother's kindness as weakness and my silence as permission. The real turning point came 2 years ago. I had just returned from the doctor's office, a folder of test results in my hands. They weren't disastrous, but they weren't good either. My daughter found me at the kitchen table, staring at the papers. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even sit down. She only asked one question. "So, what happens to the house if something happens to you?" Her voice was casual, almost curious, but I caught the flicker in her eyes. That flicker wasn't concern. It was interest. That night I told my wife. She paled but shook her head firmly. "You're reading too much into it." She didn't mean it that way. But deep down I knew better. From then on I started paying attention. To her words, to her movements, to the way she lingered around my study, pretending to look for something, to the way her questions always circled back to what was mine, what she thought would one day be hers. And slowly the pieces fell together. She didn't see me as a father. She saw me as an obstacle. Still, I held my silence. I had promised my wife I would keep the peace, and as long as she lived, I did. But even silence has limits. One evening, not long before my wife fell ill, I walked into the living room and found my daughter speaking on the phone. She hadn't heard me come in. Her tone was low, hushed, but clear enough. "Once Mom's gone, it'll just be him. He's easy. Always has been. We'll handle it." My chest tightened. The words seared into me, but I backed away without a sound. I told no one, not even my wife. What good would it have done to hurt her more while she was already fighting for her life? So I carried the knowledge quietly, waiting, watching. And when the illness finally took my wife, I braced myself. That day at the funeral, when my daughter whispered those 7 words, "Now he's all alone, easy to control," it wasn't a revelation. It was confirmation. She thought her mask had never slipped. She thought she was clever. But she had shown me her hand long before. And what she didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had already started preparing for the day she tried to tighten the leash. The day had finally come. And while she believed she held the strings, I was already cutting them one by one. After that night, when I overheard her on the phone, something inside me shifted. Grief still pressed on me like a stone, but it no longer made me weak. It made me careful. I learned a long time ago that anger is loud, but resolve is quiet. If I was going to protect what my wife and I had built, I couldn't storm, shout, or confront. That would give her the advantage. She'd twist the story, shed her tears, make me look like the bitter old man lashing out. No, if she thought I was easy to control, then I would let her keep thinking that. I began small. I cleaned out my study one afternoon while she was out. Decades of paperwork, bills, receipts, insurance policies. I organized every file, every statement, every deed. My daughter had always treated my office as an inconvenience, a boring place she didn't understand. She never thought I noticed the times she rifled through my drawers. But I had. And now, I made sure there was nothing left for her to find. Important documents went into a safe deposit box at the bank. I kept only decoys at home, papers that looked official but were useless without context. Next, I called my lawyer. We met quietly, no paper trail my daughter could stumble upon. I explained my concerns without naming her directly. He nodded slowly, and together we updated my will, added clauses she couldn't wriggle around, protections she couldn't undo. I signed papers that day knowing she would never see them until it was too late. I also made another arrangement, one I didn't tell even my lawyer about. A sealed letter, locked away, to be delivered to specific people if anything unexpected happened to me. In that letter I recorded everything. The whispers, the phone call, the words I had overheard at the funeral. Names, dates, details. It wasn't paranoia. It was insurance. But my preparations weren't just legal. I started watching her more closely. Every smile she offered me, every, "Are you okay, Dad?" felt like performance. She asked more and more about finances, sometimes innocently, sometimes too directly. "Do you have enough saved? What's the policy on the house?" She even tried, once, to get me to sign a paper she claimed was routine. I read it twice, then 3 times before handing it back. Her face fell when I said calmly, "We'll talk about this another time." She thought she could catch me tired, distracted, softened by grief. But grief had become my armor. There were nights I sat alone in the kitchen, the house too quiet, staring at the chair where my wife used to sit. I thought about her voice telling me to be patient, to forgive. My heart ached, but I also knew, if she could see now what our daughter had become, she would no longer tell me to stay silent. She would want me to protect what mattered. And so I did. One evening, my daughter invited me to dinner at her place. The table was set beautifully, the food too fancy for a casual night. She poured my wine herself, sat close, her eyes too bright. "We should talk about the future," she said. I listened. She spoke gently, circling the subject, but it was clear what she wanted. Control. Control over the house, over the money, over me. She framed it as helping me and taking care of things. But the hunger in her voice was unmistakable. I nodded, smiled faintly, let her think I was grateful. All the while, I imagined the papers locked in the bank, the letter sealed away, the safety nets she didn't know existed. That night, as she drove me home, she looked satisfied, certain that she had me wrapped around her finger. But when I stepped through my front door, I felt something different. For the first time since my wife's death, I felt steady. Because I knew this, my daughter believed she was setting the stage. But the stage had already been built by me. And when the curtain finally rose, it would not be my downfall the audience saw. It would be hers. My daughter must have thought she was clever. In the weeks after the funeral, her tone with me changed. At first, she played the grieving child, bringing me meals, checking in, sitting with me in silence. To anyone outside, she looked like the perfect daughter, carrying the weight of loss beside her father. But I knew better. Every visit had its purpose. She'd linger in my kitchen, eyes sweeping across unopened envelopes. She'd stand in my study doorway, commenting casually on the old papers stacked on my shelves. She asked about the house utilities, the bills, the insurance, always framed as concern, always disguised as care. "Dad, maybe I should take over paying these for you," she said once, gathering envelopes into her hands before I quietly took them back. "I can manage," I told her, voice calm, face unreadable. Her smile was tight, her eyes flickering with irritation before she smoothed them over again. She believed I was fragile, grief-stricken, old, too tired to resist. She believed her performance was working, and in a way I let her win. When she suggested I move into her guest room for company, I agreed for a week. I let her think I was falling into her orbit, letting go of independence. Each morning, she fussed about, insisting on pouring my coffee, checking my mail, steering conversations toward money. But what she didn't know was that while she circled, I observed. I learned her patterns. I listened when she thought I wasn't paying attention. One night, I lay awake in her guest room, the door slightly ajar. I heard her voice in the kitchen, low, careful. "He's pliable now. Just a matter of time. Once the accounts are transferred, everything else will follow." The clink of glass, the faint hum of approval from whoever was on the other end of the line. I stared at the ceiling, silent, still. She thought the walls kept her secrets. She didn't know I had heard enough to know exactly what she was planning. The next morning, I let her hand me a stack of forms. "Routine," she said lightly, "just to simplify things, to make sure I can handle things for you." Her eyes watched me carefully as I lifted the pen. For a moment, I pretended to hesitate. Then I smiled faintly, signing the top page with deliberate slowness. Her shoulders relaxed. She thought she had won another step. What she didn't notice was that I had signed nothing real. I had swapped her stack with my own. Papers that looked convincing but were meaningless duplicates I had prepared weeks ago. She took them eagerly, never realizing her victory was hollow. That was the game. She thought she was in control. She thought she was leading me down a path of her design. But every move she made was one I had already anticipated. And while she believed she was tightening the leash, she was walking herself straight into a trap she couldn't escape. I returned home after that week, claiming the house felt too empty without my wife, that I needed to sit in my own chair, breathe the air of my own walls. She smiled, agreeing sweetly, but I saw the flicker of annoyance. She hadn't gotten me under her roof permanently. Still, she didn't press. She believed she had time. Days passed. I kept my routines. Walks in the morning. Reading in the evening. Phone calls she thought were to old friends, when in truth they were updates to lawyers, quiet meetings with bankers, silent arrangements that made sure she could never touch what wasn't hers. And each time she visited, she left believing her plan was working. She thought I was alone, vulnerable, easy. But what she didn't realize was that she wasn't the hunter. She was already in the cage. And soon, she'd hear the door slam shut. I learned long ago that patience is sharper than anger. A man who rushes to strike will often miss his target. But a man who waits, who studies, who plans, his strike cannot fail. So I waited. My daughter believed she was close to victory. Each week she circled tighter, offering to handle this bill, look into that account, nudging me toward the image of a helpless old man who couldn't manage on his own. Her voice dripped with sympathy, but her eyes betrayed her hunger. "Dad, you shouldn't be burdened with this paperwork," she told me one afternoon, sliding another form across my kitchen table. "Let me take care of it for you." I smiled faintly, lifted my pen, and scrawled a slow signature. She tucked the pages away like treasure, not realizing they were as empty as her promises. But each time she thought she gained ground, I gained more than she could imagine. Behind closed doors, my lawyer finalized protections she couldn't undo. At the bank, managers noted my instructions carefully, nodding at the sealed envelope with my signature across the flap. I told them, "If anything should happen to me, you deliver this immediately." They didn't need to know the details. They only needed to know it was ironclad. And then I took another step, one that would ensure she walked straight into the snare. I invited her to dinner. She arrived with her usual practice smile, dressed elegantly, carrying a bottle of wine. "I thought it might cheer you up," she said. I set the table myself, the house dimly lit with candles, just as my wife used to like it. We ate slowly, talking about trivial things. She laughed, touched my hand, and every gesture was part of her performance. But I wasn't watching her mask. I was watching the cracks beneath it. Halfway through the meal, I leaned back and sighed. "You're right," I said softly. "This has all been too much. I can't keep up with the responsibilities anymore." Her eyes gleamed instantly, though she tried to hide it. "You don't need to, Dad," she said quickly. "That's what I'm here for. You can trust me." I nodded, as though defeated, as though her whisper at the funeral had been prophecy instead of arrogance. "You'll have to take over everything soon," I told her. "It's just, I need to know you're ready." She placed her hand over mine, squeezing gently. I've always been ready. Her words were smooth, confident. She had no idea she was agreeing to a test she could never pass. After she left that night, I sat in the silence of the house, staring at the empty chair across from me. My wife's absence ached like an open wound, but it also steadied me. I remembered her warnings, her hope that our daughter would change. And I whispered into the still air, "I won't let her take what you built." In the following days, I staged my weakness. I left papers on the counter, copies of course, waiting for her eyes to land on them. I pretended to fumble with bills, letting her swoop in and save me. I even sighed once, deliberately, as I shuffled through old files. "You don't need to do this, Dad," she said, almost impatient. "I told you, I'll handle it." And I let her believe she was handling everything. The more confident she grew, the closer she came to the trap. One evening, I caught her in my study, rifling through drawers she thought were hers to search. I stood in the doorway silently, watching as her hands moved quickly, desperately. She didn't even notice me at first. When she did, she jumped, forcing a nervous laugh. "Oh, I was just looking for a pen," she stammered. I smiled calmly. "Of course." She exhaled, relieved, not realizing she had already revealed herself. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I simply let the silence stretch, then turned and walked away. Because I knew something she didn't. The game was no longer about control. It was about timing. And when the timing was right, when she thought she held every card, I would stand, and the truth would cut sharper than any blade. The thing about greed is simple. Once it tastes progress, it always hungers for more. At first, my daughter had been cautious, probing, suggesting, pretending that her interest was selfless care. But by the second month after the funeral, the mask slipped more often. Her confidence grew. She believed the house, the accounts, everything I had worked for was already hers. And with that belief, she began to overreach. Started with my mail. I came home one afternoon to find her sitting at the kitchen table, envelopes already torn open, bills and statements spread before her. She looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just trying to stay ahead of things for you, Dad," she said sweetly. I glanced at the papers, copies I had left out deliberately. She thought they were originals. She thought she was holding power. I only nodded and poured myself a glass of water. The next week, she pressed harder. "You know, it's really not safe for you to keep handling all this alone," she said, her tone laced with just enough impatience to sound like concern. "What if something happens? What if you forget?" Forget. The word stung. Not because I believed it, but because I could hear the contempt beneath her voice. To her, I was already the frail old man she could bend and break at will. But I only smiled faintly and said, "Maybe you're right." That was all it took. Her visits became more frequent, her hands more invasive. She started rearranging my files, placing things into folders of her own, setting aside papers she deemed important. Once, I caught her staring at the safe in the corner of my study, eyes narrowed, lips pursed. "You should really let me keep track of that for you," she said. I chuckled softly as though amused. Maybe someday. Her smile tightened. But someday was not soon enough for her. A week later, I woke in the middle of the night to a faint creak downstairs. I moved silently, years of habit keeping my steps light, and stopped at the top of the staircase. There she was, my daughter, flashlight in hand, rifling through my desk with frantic urgency. I stood in the shadows, watching. She pulled out folders, opened drawers, her movements hurried but practiced. She knew what she was looking for, or at least thought she did. The beam of her light landed on the safe, and she froze. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then she reached out, touched the dial, and began twisting. My grip tightened on the banister, but I said nothing. Not yet. After several failed attempts, she cursed under her breath and slammed the flashlight down. Papers rustled, drawers slammed shut, and then she straightened, smoothing her hair, as if trying to erase the evidence of her desperation. By the time she crept out the front door, she never knew I had been there, silent, watching. The next morning, she arrived bright and cheerful, carrying pastries. "Thought you might like some breakfast, Dad." I took the bag, met her eyes and smiled calmly. "Thank you." Her performance was flawless, but I had seen behind the curtain. That night, I sat in my study with the safe open, the real documents untouched inside. I traced my fingers over the folders, the sealed envelope waiting for its moment. Everything she wanted was here, but she would never touch it. I leaned back in the chair, the quiet of the house pressing around me, and let the truth settle deeper in my bones. She thought she was the spider, but she was only the fly, thrashing in a web she didn't even see. And the moment she crossed into my study in the dark of night, she sealed her fate. She thought she was preparing her victory, but all she had done was walk willingly into her own destruction. By the time I caught her prowling through my study at night, I knew the endgame had begun. Greed had stripped away her patience. She wasn't pretending to help anymore. She was hunting, and I was ready. I spent the following days quietly preparing the stage where the truth would reveal itself. Not my house, not hers. Somewhere public, somewhere she would feel safe enough to show her hand, and where there would be no way for her to twist the story afterward. I chose the bank. The manager already knew me well. I had spoken to him in confidence weeks before, telling him I feared manipulation. He had listened carefully, nodding, and promised discretion. So when I called and asked for a private appointment, one where my daughter could assist me with paperwork, he agreed instantly. "Just bring her in," he said. "We'll make sure everything is clear." Perfect. That night, when my daughter visited, I let my shoulders sag a little more than usual. I sighed often, let my words trail off as though I had forgotten what I was saying. She noticed immediately, leaning across the table with that same rehearsed concern. "Dad, you can't keep doing this alone," she urged. "You need me. Just let me handle things. I promise I'll take care of everything for you." I let silence stretch between us, as though I were wrestling with the weight of surrender. Finally, I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe it's time." Her smile bloomed like victory itself. I told her about the appointment at the bank, pretending it was her idea all along. She agreed eagerly, her voice trembling with excitement she tried to disguise as kindness. "That's wonderful, Dad. You'll see. It'll be so much easier once I'm handling things for you." She believed it. The next few days I played my part perfectly. I let her see me struggling with simple tasks, fumbling with my checkbook, forgetting where I left my glasses. She hovered, guiding, controlling, convincing herself more and more that I was slipping. She thought she had already won. But in truth, she was walking into a carefully set stage, one where the script had already been written. On the morning of the appointment, she drove me to the bank herself. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her jaw set. She was nervous, though she tried to hide it with chatter. "You'll feel so much better after this," she said lightly. "You won't have to worry about anything anymore." I nodded, staring out the window. Inside, I felt the weight of my wife's absence more than ever. She should have been there beside me. She should have seen this with her own eyes. But I knew, if she were watching from somewhere, she would understand why I had chosen this path. We walked into the bank together. The manager greeted us warmly, shaking my hand, offering my daughter a polite smile she mistook for approval. "Right this way," he said, leading us to a private room with a long table and stacks of neatly prepared folders. My daughter's eyes lit up. To her, it must have looked like treasure waiting to be claimed. The manager gestured for us to sit. "We'll go over the paperwork step by step," he explained. "We want to make sure everything is perfectly clear." "Of course," my daughter said smoothly, already leaning forward, eager. I sat back, my face calm, my hands steady, because I knew what was coming. She thought this was the day she finally took control. But it was the day she would lose everything. The private room was bright, almost sterile. A long polished table, leather chairs, the faint hum of air conditioning. To me, it felt like a stage. To her, it must have looked like a vault about to swing open. She sat tall, eyes locked on the folders the manager had placed before us. Her hand drifted toward the nearest one before he even finished speaking. "Now," he said carefully, "before we begin, I just want to be absolutely certain that both of you understand what's being requested today." My daughter gave a rehearsed laugh, light and dismissive. "Oh, it's nothing complicated. My father just wants to simplify things. I'll be handling his accounts from now on." The manager didn't move. His gaze slid from her to me. "Is that correct, Mr. Whitmore?" I let the silence hang for a beat too long. My daughter shot me a sharp glance, then quickly softened her face into a smile. I nodded slowly, almost wearily. "Yes," I murmured. "That's what she says." Her face brightened instantly, and she leaned forward. "Exactly. He's been under so much stress since Mom passed. It's just too much for him. I'll make sure everything is taken care of properly." The manager's expression didn't change. He tapped the top folder, flipping it open. "These documents would transfer authority. Once signed, they cannot be reversed without legal proceedings." My daughter's fingers twitched. She reached for the pen before I even moved. "That's fine," she said quickly. "That's exactly what we need." I sat still, watching her. My heart was steady, my face calm. The manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore, before you sign, I need to ask you directly. Do you fully understand what you're doing? This would give your daughter complete control over your accounts, your assets, even your property." Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and expectant. She forced a tender tone, her hand brushing my arm. "Of course he understands. He wants this, right, Dad?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Go ahead," I said softly. Relief washed over her face like victory. She pressed the papers toward me, sliding the pen into my hand. My hand trembled just slightly as I set the tip to the page. She leaned in closer, eyes glittering. She thought she was seconds from triumph. But then the manager raised his hand. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice firm now, not gentle, "please read the section I've highlighted." Her smile faltered. "That's not necessary," but I read aloud, my voice steady. "In the presence of bank officials, I hereby declare that I have not been coerced, pressured, or manipulated into this decision. Any indication otherwise will render this document void." I set the pen down deliberately. My daughter's face tightened. The manager looked at me. "Mr. Whitmore, do you feel any form of pressure here today?" The room fell silent. Her hand on my arm stiffened. For a long moment, I let the silence hold. I could almost feel her panic beginning to rise beneath her skin, though she tried to mask it with another sweet smile. I leaned back, folding my hands. My eyes never left hers. "No," I said finally. "Not today." Her relief was visible, a small breath escaping her. She pushed the papers toward me again. But she didn't see the manager's eyes narrow, or the faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth, because today was not the day I surrendered. Today was the day she learned she had never been in control at all. My daughter's hand hovered over the papers like a hawk about to strike. She believed she was one signature away from owning me, from erasing every barrier between her and the life she thought she deserved. But she didn't know the curtain was about to fall. I reached into my jacket pocket. Slowly, calmly, she watched, her eyes narrowing. For the first time that morning, uncertainty flickered across her face. "What are you doing, Dad?" she asked softly. I pulled out a sealed envelope. Heavy, thick, marked with my signature across the flap. I set it gently on the table between us. Her smile froze. The bank manager raised an eyebrow. "And this is my statement," I said evenly. "Prepared weeks ago, to be read today in this room with witnesses present." Her hand twitched, as if she wanted to snatch it away, but she forced a laugh. "Dad, really, this is unnecessary." "Go ahead," I told the manager, sliding the envelope toward him. He hesitated only briefly before breaking the seal. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the silent room. My daughter's knuckles whitened as she gripped the table edge. The manager began to read aloud. If you are hearing these words, it means my daughter has attempted to gain control over my estate under the guise of helping me. This decision is not of my free will. I have been manipulated, pressured, and deceived. I have therefore placed protections in my will and in my accounts that will immediately revoke any authority she might attempt to claim. The color drained from her face. Furthermore, the manager continued, I declare that any attempt on her part to coerce or mislead me is to be considered fraud. Evidence of such attempts has been documented and stored safely. Should this situation arise, I request that the bank refuse her any authority and notify my attorney immediately. The words hung heavy in the air. Her chair screeched as she lurched forward. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her mask cracking. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's confused, he's grieving. But her voice shook. The calm confidence she had carried into the room was gone, stripped away in seconds. I sat still, my eyes fixed on her. My voice, when I spoke, was steady as stone. Confused? I wrote that letter the week after your mother died. When you whispered at her funeral that I was easy to control. I heard every word. I've heard every word since. Her mouth opened, then closed. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale, trembling. The manager cleared his throat, folding the letter. Mr. Whitmore, your instructions are clear. Nothing will be transferred. Your accounts remain secure. He glanced at my daughter with thinly veiled disapproval. And this meeting is over. She stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief, fury, and something else, fear. Dad, she hissed, her voice low now, desperate. You don't understand. I was only trying to help. You can't do this to me. I rose slowly from my chair, tucking the pen back into my pocket. My movements were calm, deliberate, unshaken. I didn't do this to you, I said quietly. You did it to yourself. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then she pushed back from the table, her chair scraping hard against the floor, and stormed out of the room. The bank manager gathered the folders into a neat stack, his expression unreadable. You were right to prepare, Mr. Whitmore. I nodded once, my gaze lingering on the doorway where my daughter had disappeared, because I knew this wasn't just the end of a meeting. It was the end of her illusion of control. The drive home from the bank was quiet. My daughter sat rigid in the driver's seat, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel, her jaw clenched. Every few seconds, she glanced at me, as though searching for some weakness, some crack she could still exploit. But I gave her nothing. No words, no anger, no satisfaction, only silence. When we reached my house, she pulled into the driveway too quickly, tires crunching against the gravel. She didn't even wait for me to unbuckle my seatbelt before snapping. This isn't over, Dad. You can't just cut me out like this. I've given you everything these last weeks. I've taken care of you. I turned slowly, meeting her wild eyes with a calm steadiness that made her falter. You didn't take care of me, I said evenly. You tried to take everything from me, and now you have nothing. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She sat frozen for a moment, then slammed the car door so hard the sound echoed across the street. She stormed away, leaving me standing at the front steps. The house was silent when I entered. Still, empty. The air carried the faint scent of my wife's perfume from the scarf I kept on the armchair. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not triumph. Just the release of a weight I had carried since the funeral. I sank into my chair, staring at the quiet room. The trap had closed. The game was over. She thought she had left me alone and weak. But in the end, I was never the one who was alone. I had my wife's memory. I had my strength. I had my silence. And she had her nothing.